Hi, I'm Steven.
And I'm Jake.
Welcome to Tales from the SaaS Graveyard, where we talk to employees at tech companies that are in the middle of the bell curve. Not going out of business, but definitely not hitting the big time. The SaaS Graveyard is a purgatory populated by companies that have made it to annual revenues in the 30 to 50 million range, but can't get to the next level, which is pretty impressive outside of Silicon Valley, but frowned upon here.
We interview folks in various roles about their experience working at companies like this. We're looking to see what common themes emerge across industries and roles. Today, we'll be talking with our friend Lauren, who had a couple of different roles at a company we will call Circle. With over 200 employees, Circle was a competitor to Square with a focus on the restaurant industry. This was Lauren's first real job out of school. So, Stephen, what was your first job out of school and what was it like?
Well, my first job out of school is very similar to what I do now. So I got a product manager role at a Fortune 500 company, and I've been a product manager ever since. But I think the big thing with your first role, Jake, is you learn a lot of things you don't really like about what you're doing. And the thing about this company, I learned that waterfall is way too slow for shipping software, which I didn't get a full grasp on how slow it was until I worked at a company that was much smaller to see how fast we were shipping. So that's something I learned I really didn't like, was shipping software slow. Um, I also like work a lot better. Like, I was surprised on how much more autonomy you have. Like after college, like, it's pretty relaxed and free. But when you're in high school, you have this idea of like what it means to go to quote unquote work, because you're sitting in lecture all day. You're going to have to write in cursive. Your teachers are very strict. Where the corporate world, as long as you generally get your work done and you're presentable, things are going pretty well for you. It's not too stressful. As long as you're making focus on making money for the company, things are good. If anything, I would say things are a little less strict, a lot less strict than I was expecting at this company, because I used to wear a tie every day in college. But when I started working there, everyone looked at me like I was very weird for wearing a tie. And they thought I was very strange for doing that. So I actually stopped wearing a tie when I joined this company.
Well,
What about you, Jake?
Well, I think that the whole business about the tie that's very much focused on the tech world. That there are some industries where you still are expected to wear a tie. And so my first job out of college was in finance, and I did have to wear a tie. And I remember that just as my first job out of school, I felt very stifled. I mean, you had all this freedom and autonomy, but I felt very stifled just having to be somewhere for 40 hours a week, where college, you maybe have like 15 hours worth of classes a week, and then you got to do whatever you want the rest of the week. And so having to be somewhere in the same desk from 9 to 5 just felt, um, it felt rough to me. But eventually I got used to it, and I did like that my job, there was like sort of constant work to do. So the day did move pretty fast because you were always working. And that's something to this day that I like, is when there's a job where I don't have a lot of work or I'm a little bored, I go a little stir crazy, and I stopped doing the work that I have, even though I have plenty of time to do it. I work much better in an environment if I'm like really busy. But my biggest takeaway from this first role was that I didn't like finance. I took the job out of college because I always enjoyed working with numbers, and so I thought I'd like this. But I realized, like, no, I get zero fulfillment out of this, and so my career has really been looking for things as far away from that. And it's how I finally ended up as a podcast host, which is the complete 180 from finance. Well, enough about us. Let's hear about Lauren's first role. Lauren, thanks for joining us today.
It's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
All right, let's get started. How did you end up at Circle?
So, when I joined this company, I was actually fresh out of college. I went to school, I studied hotel administration. So, my main focus had been restaurants, restaurant development, a lot of work on the culinary side as well. So, that's what I thought I would go do. And I was working in restaurants right after school, managing, operating, hiring people, negotiating with food vendors, doing the whole 9 yards. And ultimately, it wasn't really fulfilling me. It wasn't really how I wanted to spend my time. So I found this job because I wanted to be more on the business end of the industry. So this company was helping restaurants, theoretically, helping them streamline operations, take payments more successfully. And it seemed pretty revolutionary because a lot of restaurant technology was server-based, and this was one of the first cloud-based systems. So to me, it felt like a really cool opportunity and interesting time to join and sort of switch from being an operator to being somebody who was helping develop technology to make the industry a little bit more streamlined.
Got it. And when you were in restaurant operations, did you have interactions with this company already, or was it more that you were looking for a job and you stumbled upon them in your research?
I have to say, one of my main pain points was setting up the point of sale system in the restaurant. And it was this clunky server based technology. And we had one day where the system, it just blew out. Like the server just, it stopped working. It was on premise in the basement. And we basically lost all of our payments for the day and then had to send the system out to go be repaired. So we couldn't take payments for a period of time. And that was just extremely aggravating. And to me, it was just kind of really top of mind. And then eventually, sort of in my journey, I stumbled across this company, kind of remembered the experience I had gone through. And I imagine so many other people in the restaurant industry have gone through as well, and thought it was a pretty bright and revolutionary idea to bring all this restaurant technology into the cloud and to basically have the ability to take payments wherever, whenever.
Got it. So, were you then actively looking for jobs, or did you just decided like, hey, this just sounds really cool, I want to reach out to them?
I was actively looking. So I left my job in the restaurant world. I was sort of taking time to kind of decide, okay, what is it that I really want to do? Do I want to go to law school? Do I want to go into banking? Do I want to do all the things that everyone else that I'd gone to university with was winding up doing and being successful at? And I kind of took a look at myself and I said, here's what I'm passionate about. Here's what my skills are. I should really continue to focus on the industry that I love, but find a way to do it that engages my mind more.
Hmm.
And I found this opportunity on a job site called Angel List, which is like the LinkedIn for startups. I'm
Okay.
not sure how active that site is these days, but it was pretty hot about 5 or so years ago. And so I found the job on this site, and it just seemed really aligned to what I wanted to do. I submitted my resume, I got an interview, and I think like 2 to 3 interviews later, I basically had the job and moved my whole life from the East Coast over to San Francisco.
Got it. So you moved out to San Francisco specifically for this role.
Specifically for this role, I only knew one other person and maybe two people in San Francisco. Just packed literally 2 suitcases, found a random apartment on Craigslist, and just took off. I mean, I was in my early 20s. I was super super naive, and I was just ready to take a shot and try something new and something that was actually quite frankly pretty unexpected for me. I never thought I would wind up in tech.
Now, so you mentioned that from your experience working in the restaurant industry, you realized that this was a good product. During the interview process, what is it that drew you to Circle?
I'm not really sure. I mean, the process was so quick. I didn't really think twice about it. I think I interviewed twice with the woman who would become my boss, and I had, I think, one interview with more of a lateral teammate, and then I had one very brief phone call with the CEO. Part of it, actually, to me, that was so exciting is that the CEO was a female. So this is a female-founded tech company that was poised to be super successful. And being the feminist that I am, it sounded really intriguing to work for one, a female boss, and two, female leadership. And so that was something that was exciting and inspiring. And so I thought that how could I possibly go wrong?
Now, did you have any reservations, or were you 100% this is the right move for me?
I mean, I was so young at the time. I was just pretty gung ho about it. It sounded great. It got me to a new city. It got me to California, which is a place I'd always wanted to live, even ever since I was young. So yeah, I didn't really have any reservations. I mean, tech just sounded like this bright, shiny thing to get involved in. And, coming out of a hotel school program, not a lot of people were doing it. People went into real estate specific to hotels. People became operators in the hotel and restaurant world. But was anyone really going into tech? No. I thought I had to strike out, be the one that was different, kind of beat to my own drum and try this different thing. I didn't even hold back. I just leapt and went for it.
Now, so it sounds great that you had no reservations. If you could go back in time, are there any questions you wish you would have asked during the interview process?
Absolutely. I think, some of the things that I uncovered in my time there um, are not things that anyone would have been honest about in an interview process. I think I would have asked more about the day to day of the job. I probably did and probably got a false answer, to be honest. I think I would have asked more about the culture. I think I would have asked probably about like the growth trajectory that they saw in this role. Just really standard things that I probably overlooked being so young and just obviously so green. But again, a lot of the things about a job, like you just really don't know until you start that first day and you have that first week, that first month, even that first 90 days. Like a lot of stuff can come to life that you just could never anticipate in the interview process.
Right. Even if people are being 100% honest, there's still, you have to do it to actually know what it's like.
Exactly. And especially for me, it was a job I had never done before. Like I'd barely done any jobs besides cook in a restaurant and manage a restaurant and, do a few like one-off like marketing internships. I'd never worked in a tech company, so I didn't know what to expect. I probably should have talked to other people who were already working there or people at other tech companies to kind of see what their Silicon Valley experience was like. I should have like, understood the landscape maybe a bit more, but there is literally nothing that could have prepared me for what I set out to do once I got there.
And the role that you were hired for, what was the title and what were extensively what was the job description?
So the way they framed it to me is that I was going to be a client relations manager and I would be working with their clients, predominantly restaurants, to help them optimize their use of the software. So a lot of restaurant owners are, not very data driven. They don't understand technology. So it was basically just to be an educator and to help them implement the software. That's the way this was positioned to me. As I started the job, what I realized I was doing was some lightweight network engineering to help them configure their networks because the system ran on its own proprietary network. And then secondarily, it was diffusing litigation. There were a lot of severely unhappy customers that were threatening all sorts of things, and my job was to go into each contract and figure out whether or not that they had grounds to terminate their business with us. So I was handling high level escalations, I was diffusing the minor ones, and if something was hugely problematic, it was my job to make the call of whether or not it would get surfaced up the chain to leadership.
Wow. So maybe walk us through sort of from how you went from day one to sort of what you're describing now. Like, what was your first day like?
So my first day, I was probably just shadowing calls. We had a couple more tenured teammates, and they were just used to doing this job day in and day out. And so I probably was on some lighter weight calls to start, nothing too scary. And it was just kind of, chatting with the client, asking them about their day, just being personable. And then, getting into thick of the issue. And, sometimes it was as simple as they like forgot to like turn on a certain setting, or they like needed to enable something to accept payments, or they needed to, run some integration to their QuickBooks software. Sometimes it was very, very basic, very, very simple, easy to solve. But other times it wasn't so easy. It was someone whose network had crashed and they still weren't able to take payments. So they lost a whole day of revenue. And in the world of a restaurant, that's a huge deal, right? We're seeing this with COVID-19. Most restaurants only have 16 days of operating capital before they might go out of business. So to these business owners, this was their bread and butter. This was their whole life. So they would get, pretty hostile. And so we managed everything through Zendesk. We had a ticketing system, and the team kind of evolved. I did this job for about 10 months before I pivoted to the marketing team at Circle. And we kind of started, I was more of a restaurant expert. We had some new teammates join us. One who I'm still really close friends with to this day. She was an expert in retail. So I would take restaurant clients. She would take retail. We shifted at one point to becoming a round robin. We shifted at another point to, kind of owning certain relationships. So it would kind of pivot. But honestly, the day in and the day out, it felt the same of sending emails, directing people to the right places in the product to turn on certain features, getting on the phone, diffusing litigation. Every now and again, we'd actually have to go out to certain clients and meet with them in person. And that was always quite stressful. Sometimes we would have to get the head of customer success on the phone with them. Sometimes we would have to get someone even more senior than that. I think we had the CTO on a few calls every now and again. It was pretty insane. And our job was just to, cool these people down and convince them to stay on board with us. And we were paid basically every time that we were able to retain a client. Like this wasn't client relations, this was client retentions.
When you say you were paid every time you retain a client, does that mean like you were incentivized beyond your normal salary for like someone not leaving?
That's correct. There was a bonus structure, I think, about like halfway through my time on this team. They're like, all right, we have a retention problem. People are churning way too fast. So if the reason code on the ticket was someone trying to churn, if you were able to retain that client, you would receive a bonus for retaining the client, which I don't think is actually too abnormal. That's like very par for the course in any sort of SaaS technology business, I think, where there are escalation issues.
So, Lauren, you got this new job. You have a pretty high stress environment that you're working in. But something that Jake and I always like to dig into is a little bit of the office space that you were in. Can you describe the office from the moment you entered the building to when you sat at your desk and kind of the vibe?
Definitely. So it was actually really interesting. We had two offices over the span of time I was there. And the first office I was in was really interesting, especially because I spent time on both floors. You'd enter the building, and it was a beautiful old blonde brick building right between North Beach and the financial district of San Francisco. And it was a shared building with a number of different offices, and we had two floors. And so the lower level floor was mostly it was a quiet floor. So it was the client relations team, it was engineering, and it was some other sort of client services and success functions. And so, other than the chatter on the phone, it wasn't too loud, like not a lot of energy. The personalities down there were also just kind of tamer. And then you would move up. Our other floor was the rooftop of this building. So it was another wide open floor plan, meeting rooms kind of flanking the sides of the office space. And then they had actually a big patio. And this was the floor where you had sales and marketing. So this was the party floor. And it was loud. There were people shooting Nerf guns. It was just like always a rager up there. The deck outside, it was beautiful, amazing views of North Beach. We had a barbecue and everything. Um, Most afternoons or evenings, you could find people playing beer pong or flip cup. Every stereotype you can think about a Silicon Valley tech company, you would probably find on that floor. So if you can only imagine, it was quite an exciting place, and a little bit confusing being fresh out of college, because you think when you leave college, right? But
Mhm.
this top floor was a fraternity party nonstop.
Is there something that you're particularly like really proud of what you've accomplished there?
I was really proud of negotiating my way over into the marketing organization. So I tried to leave this company so many times, but something would always pull me back, or there would be a reason to stay, or whatever other offer I was getting just wasn't compelling enough. So I actually got an offer from one of the major ride sharing companies, and I walked it over to a manager, or I'm not even sure who I brought this up to, but I said, "Hey, I want to be on your marketing team. I have this offer from this ride sharing company. If you do not move me to the marketing team, I will be leaving." And so they said,
Wow.
"Okay, what can we do for you?" And I said, "Great. I saw you have this one opening. I'd like to interview for it." And they basically just let me have the job. It was just being an analyst on the marketing team, specifically supporting the demand generation function. So acquiring new clients. This is like still a job I feel guilty about in some ways till this day, because basically like we would be bringing on these clients to a software that didn't work super well. So that was a whole interesting thing. But the beautiful thing about that job is that my manager was so hands off. I had the opportunity to self teach myself like everything about the demand gen world. Like he really didn't care what I was up to. He gave me a few tasks, few things to get done a week, really straightforward stuff. And he basically pointed out, this is what you need to know. Here's Marketo, here's Facebook advertising, here's Google AdWords, go figure it out. And so I just kind of opened up all the systems. I read as much as I humanly possibly could. And over the span of, I would say, 3 months, I just taught myself everything there was to know about demand gen at the time. And so eventually that boss and the other analysts on my team, they decided within a week of each other that they would both be leaving me. And they said, best of luck. Here's a $5 million budget. You're going to run this whole system by yourself. Um, and so I spent the next year and a half operating that system all by myself. So I think that's really what I'm most proud of when it comes to my work at this company, is actually re-architecting a lot of the work that they had done, and then building off of that further to create a really powerful demand generation engine.
Now, I have a question. You had this offer from a ride sharing company at the same time. So, and then you leveraged that to get a better role within Circle. Did you debate which role to take even after they offered you the marketing role, whether to stay or to still go to the ride sharing company?
Honestly, I haven't really admitted this, but that was a bluff. I was never going to take that ride sharing job. It was another client relations job. And not only that, it was contract work. It wasn't even salaried. It was just a better company for my resume. And, honestly, I would have been fine to take it, but it wasn't something that I wanted to do. It was mostly a negotiation tactic more than anything else.
Nice.
Yeah, that's awesome. Great work on that. I'll have to put that one in my back pocket to use in the future. Wow, so you just inherit a whole bunch of responsibility now on the marketing team. So you have both of the leads just say, "Hey, I'm out of here, Lauren. You're now going to manage all of this $5 million budget." What does that look like? I know we talked a lot about your previous role, but what does managing that level of budget for this company look like on a day-to-day basis?
Honestly, it was just sinking a lot of money into both Google AdWords and into Facebook. And then there were also a lot of expensive technologies we were using along the way. Like for example, Marketo is like one of the most costly marketing automation systems. I was lucky enough to be partnering with an agency, so we had people at another company actually doing the day-to-day operations in both Facebook and AdWords for us. It was just my job to set the strategy and allocate the budget between those two ad platforms. And that part of it actually, like, I found to be the easy and enjoyable part because it's data driven, and so you're just reading the numbers, you're seeing which creatives perform well, what doesn't, you're pulling the things that don't work and then implementing more of the stuff that does, and kind of iterating on that. So to me, it's an art and it's a science, and that's like where I've always enjoyed working. The really tricky part was the Marketo instance. It was built in a way that was really kind of clunky. Like every single ad campaign, every single like individual ad had its own landing page. So we had hundreds of landing pages floating out there, and I had to find a way to like recall all of them and then like only launch like a handful to make sure everything was tracked properly. We knew which ads were converting, whether it was branded, non-branded, and in AdWords, whether it was coming from Facebook. So I was actually lucky to work with a really talented web developer, and he showed me a lot of ways that we could basically use engineering to simplify that process. Like very primitive marketing, like if you want to have like the cleanest attribution possible, like yes, you should have hundreds of landing pages out there, great. But to iterate and test across hundreds of landing pages is highly ineffective. And so we worked together to implement UTM parameters, to write webhooks, to do a bunch of creative stuff. That was actually quite technical to kind of like rein in the system, simplify, and understand performance better. So that was like the really, really daunting task. And honestly, it was daunting because a lot of it was very manual, repetitive, and boring. But then a lot of it was like being careful enough to make sure you don't get your wires crossed. Um, so that was like the tough part to start. And then the other end of that was like the whole engine was feeding into Salesforce. And we had a huge Salesforce. We had like 200 reps or something crazy like that. We had a number of sales development reps who would basically receive all the inbound leads, and then it was their job to convert them and bring them over and into like a more senior account executive or into whoever was in inside sales and was going to handle the deal. And the reps, working with them actually taught me so much. Like in a lot of ways, like I'm very grateful for the experience, but in a lot of ways, I'm also extremely horrified about the experience because, some of them were really kind, lovely people, and some of them were absolute pigs, to be frank about it. And sometimes they would crack down. They'd be like, "Where are my leads? I need hot leads," and they would say mean things like that. But then other times they would make it personal, and they would objectify the marketers in ways that were definitely not welcome.
One thing that you brought up earlier, that you joined this company because there was a female CEO and your first manager was a female, and so now you're sort of indicating that there's that frat atmosphere within the sales team that it sounds like the complete opposite. When did you sort of go from like thinking, oh, this is a great like female empowered company, to being a little bit more concerned about those attitudes?
It honestly happened really quickly. This company loved to have social events, and they would have them pretty regularly, like definitely weekly happy hours, monthly team outings. And I think it was the first team outing that it really settled in for me. And this first team outing happened within my first week or two. And so they took us bowling in the Presidio. And that sounds like a really fun, like wholesome, kind of family oriented or team oriented event, right? Like what could possibly go wrong, right? It's just bowling in the afternoon. But no, they started passing out tequila shots like sometime around like, I don't know, like sometime afternoon. And I just like remember going into the bathroom at like 3 or 4 p.m. and there are already girls like who have alcohol poisoning. And I'm like, what is going on here? Like it was just really startling to think that I'd taken sort of what I thought to be like a business job, something that was like more about being in an office and being a professional, and to have people like acting like they're still in college, like wasted. That was really startling. And I think just to watch the interactions between the men and the women, like it didn't feel respectful. It didn't feel like professional. It did not feel safe. So I think I learned like very, very early on that I needed to watch my back.
And did management ever sort of address this sort of dynamic?
Honestly, no, because management perpetuated the culture. I worked for a COO who had grabbed me by the arm one time, told me I needed to take a shot or my job might not be there the next day. And it was just incidents like that. Like, I was not an exception to the rule. This was fairly commonplace. The female CEO, she didn't do anything to reprimand anyone. I think she actually, was accused of engaging in certain behavior herself. Who knows what is fact and what is fiction, but she didn't do anything to stand up for women in the workplace. And to me, that was one of the most horrifying parts of the experience there. And the fact that the rest of the leadership was all male and the behavior came, from the top down, made it feel like not a very inclusive place to work.
And what were the discussions you had with your other female colleagues about this?
So I had two female colleagues that I became extremely close with and am still friends with to this day. And a lot of it, like, all we could do was laugh, which is like honestly not what you should do. But all we could do was laugh because like it was so horrifying. It was almost funny. Like it was like something out of a book or a TV show or movie. Like they literally could have had a reality TV show on this company. And I think like we just had to do our best to stick together and to stick up for each other. So that's what we did. And also by that same token, I have to say I worked on a marketing team that was kind of split, like creative and content on one side and data and technology on the other. And so I was the only female on the data and technology side. And the three men that I worked with there, they were all like always like very lovely and supportive and like big brothers to me. So, I mean, there were some good people there, but it was just, a lot of people in sales and some other parts of the organization, um, you know, just doing things that are not safe for work, I guess is how we would say it.
Yeah. No, that's terrible. I'm sorry that you had to go through all that. But I guess getting to the kind of economic side of it, when did you know like not only is this company culturally not a good place to work, but that the company wasn't necessarily going in a positive direction?
I mean, so whether or not I knew that for sure was hard to say in the beginning because one, I was so young, I didn't really understand valuations and how all of these things
Mm-hmm.
worked. I didn't have access to a lot of the revenue numbers to start. But I just thought it was bad because all I was hearing was the negative stories and the negative experiences. When you're dealing with client escalations, like there's very rarely a happy story where, someone is loving the product and telling you about it. Nobody like writes a support line to tell you how pleased they are. So to me, like I just always thought it was a bad product from the start because I never got to hear any of the success stories, any of the positive testimonials. There are the few that they had kind of included in marketing assets, but those were so few and far between that, I wasn't convinced that it would be a successful product after maybe a month or two of working there. I was just kind of worried and wondering what I'd gotten myself into. It sounded like, something that was so innovative and pretty progressive for the industry. But it sounded like it was almost failing out in the field.
No, that's definitely. I feel like the few times if you ever yelled at by a customer, and when most of your interactions, it's never a positive sign that things are going well. So, what was your most memorable day at this company, either positive or negative?
Oh my gosh, my most memorable day. That's hard to say. It feels like so long ago. I mean, I seem to remember pretty clearly like a few days of like working insane hours with some of my teammates. We were there from 9 to 9 on certain days, just cranking through cases and just trying to solve as much as we could. And um, when you work with people on such challenging day-to-day issues, like you become pretty close and like pretty like reliant on each other. And I don't know, I just remember kind of like laughing with these girls in between calls and like being in my early 20s and like just trying to make the most of like what wasn't an ideal situation. And then I think some of the other things I remember are the moments like, when we got Series C funding, or the moments where we would have our holiday parties. Like there were some good moments and some fun moments. But again, it's like hard to look back and like really pinpoint one specific thing that really stood out in the experience there.
When your company got the Series C funding, did you start to feel like, oh, maybe this company is making it, or like was that at the time like a very positive experience?
Well, I think that's how it was kind of messaged to us, right? Like anytime you get a new round of funding, like it's always exciting, right? It means you have money in the bank and that the business has more runway to go on. And it definitely felt like something positive, but I think what I started to realize is that the money was coming from private equity, and the private equity firm was like slowly buying out the company from under the founders. And whenever there's a full-on private equity takeover, that really turns the tide of a business, sometimes for the best and sometimes for the worst.
Is that something that you thought at the time, or only looking back now?
I think looking back now, it's something that I'm more cognizant of, but it's something that I definitely realized because as soon as the funding closed, I forget if this was Series C or Series D. I was there for a while and saw a lot of cash be injected into the business. And part of me is like, oh, is this cash to keep the lights on? Or is this something because we did something right? So there was always that question in my head. And once I got more into the demand gen world and was seeing the revenue numbers, like I was always kind of concerned. And then ultimately, the two founders they left, they were bought out, and they brought in a new CEO. And the new CEO beat to a very different tune. Like the look and the feel and the energy of the company completely changed. It became more corporate. There was still bad behavior, but it definitely became more straight laced, more corporate. They took away a lot of the fun perks I think that people had become accustomed to. And the leadership had become entirely white males, for lack of a better phrase, right? And they just were all like tenured in their fields. They hadn't necessarily worked with restaurants or SMBs, so I don't think they fully grasped the end user. But they were all seasoned professionals, and it was kind of a boys' club. So that was another interesting takeover moment and another interesting shift in my timeline of being there. And like in some ways it changed for the better because it felt more buttoned up, but in some ways I feel like some of the energy that made Circle it was gone.
2 steps forward and then 1.5 steps back.
Exactly.
It's hard when there's definitely some positive aspects of things getting a little bit more grown up. It's unfortunate that things definitely, especially with that leadership team, couldn't be more diverse, and really make the company what it probably should be.
Definitely. And it was a fairly diverse company when I started, people from all sorts of backgrounds and walks of life. A handful of female sales reps, which was always good to see. Definitely not enough. But there seemed to be like somewhat of a gender balance. And I think that was just kind of like snuffed out as the private equity money came in.
So I guess going from there, what was the most ridiculous thing the company ever did during your time there?
So it's interesting. Like we can talk about it from a business perspective of like, some failed products. And then you can talk about it from different cultural moments where things just went totally awry. Uh, I think, to focus on the business and the products, they tried to create a white label product. So essentially, like imagine like an Uber Eats or a DoorDash, but like white labeled just for your restaurant. Like they tried to build that. And like they just, like knowing what I know now about product and about marketing and sales, like they just missed a million marks. And it was just like such a big investment and just such a ridiculous sort of failure, that I'm surprised that, that even like had the level of investment and was brought to life in the way that it was. And I don't know. It just seems super ridiculous and kind of, smart in the sense that it was catering to, the vertical we were seeing the most success in, but like ridiculous in the sense that it was not a core competency and we had like no features or anything to support something of that nature. It was a swing and a miss.
Gotcha. So a lot of investment in and just kind of just poor execution in the latter half of like not enough investment there.
I think it was maybe just like not a really like thorough product plan around the app. I'm not really sure because I wasn't really involved in it. I just remember them like launching it, being so excited about it, And then like all of a sudden it just kind of like disappears and goes nowhere, which is always kind of a red flag. There were a number of other features that were, kind of half baked or like poorly launched. Like product marketing was never really a true function at this company, which is interesting because I've been at now 3 technology companies, and they've all been extremely late to develop the product marketing function, which is just kind of weird to see. It's like you'll get a demand gen marketer before a product marketer, which almost doesn't really make sense.
So I guess on the other side of that, what about culturally? What was the most ridiculous thing the company did from the culture perspective?
We just used to have really excessive, lavish parties. We rented out City Hall in San Francisco once for a party. They've rented out like full party boats and yachts, just like sunk a lot of money into internal events. Rented out a nightclub once for a holiday party, just like very over the top, just like a lot of alcohol, a lot of other substances, just like so out of control. I feel like that was always like ridiculous. And like a lot of those parties felt like very glamorous and fun, but they were also, again, like they shouldn't be work parties. Like it was just like so obscene to see leadership just so intoxicated. And I don't know. I feel like there's always a very fine line. And, having like been at other companies where they take us out to Hakkasan in Las Vegas until 5 a.m, like, yes, these things happen, but I've still never seen things escalate to the level that they had at Circle.
Did you have anyone on the leadership team or kind of mentor there that you felt like you had someone to vouch for you in some way, or was it pretty much just you and your direct colleagues at that point, but no one up the chain?
It's interesting because I had, I guess, 3 different managers over the span of my time at Circle. And so the first manager, I think she didn't really understand what we all needed from her as her employees, but she was fiercely protective, which was something that I always admired. So if a client was just giving us way too much of a hard time, she wasn't afraid to step in and help us out, help solve the problem, or stick up for us when the going got rough. So that was something I respected. But in terms of my development, wasn't exactly what I needed. My second manager, completely hands off. He was just a marketing technology nerd, like really into what he did, really good at it. But again, just like gave me the complete and total autonomy to kind of just do my thing and figure it out, which I kind of prefer to being micromanaged, which I have had at other points in my career. And then my third manager, she didn't like me at first, and she made that quite clear. She didn't like a lot of us, and she was very transparent about that. But I think she like actually did take the time to get to know us and like figure out like what leadership style would work for everybody. And I think she did advocate for each of us to the best of her ability, but it was so hard because she herself barely felt like she had a seat at the table. So that was pretty challenging. But what I liked about her is like she wasn't afraid to call me on my shit. Like if I was doing something wrong or I could be doing something better, she wasn't afraid to tell me, which I liked. I liked that she was blunt with me and that she didn't sugarcoat anything.
Why do you feel she didn't like you?
I think that, it's hard to inherit a whole team. Like we were already fully assembled as a team before she got there. And I was like this like young hotshot at the company. Like I had a lot of responsibility for somebody who was very, very young. So I just kind of like thought I had my act together and was like pretty proud of the work I was doing. And I was like, I got this, like whatever. And I think like she was expecting a different personality from somebody like me. And I think she was maybe just like taken aback and surprised that I was very headstrong and just was going to keep doing things my way. And I just like remember being in a meeting with her once, and she just looks at me point blank and she goes, "Who the hell do you think you are, Don Draper? This has to stop." And yeah, that was kind of a reality check. But also she's like, "You know what? You're a free spirit. Just do your thing." And I remember when I quit, she's like, "You're going to do big things. If you ever need a head of brand one day, you know who to call." And that really that stuck with me, and that meant a lot.
So let's get over to your leaving Circle. You mentioned sort of through the course of this discussion how different things rubbed you wrong, and how you at one point you even got a counter offer just to try and get more out of the company. So you obviously had thought throughout your time there of leaving. Why did you start to actually get to that point of leaving? Like, what were the things that sort of tipped you over the edge?
I think, it was just total burnout and being, quite frankly, fed up. And I had tried to leave, like I said, multiple times. But it was hard because I was green in my career and had no proven work experience. So you can't get another job without, successfully doing the job you're in and having, projects to speak to and things that you've accomplished. And so it took me, a while to build up that body of work to be able to say, hey, here's what I've built, here's what I've done, this is what I can do for you to make your company better. And so I didn't have that story yet. And so I finally got to the point where I felt like I could tell that story and I was developing my personal brand. And so that's when I knew I could go look, and I kind of started to understand a bit more, what I was worth and what I could start asking for and out at other companies. And I guess for me, it was like the big turn in the leadership. I think we were about to move on to our third CEO, and just nothing was improving, nothing was getting better. And I just kind of felt like I gave the demand gen engine everything I could. And without having a bigger seat at the table, like there was not much more that I could do. And then our team, which had grown also very, very close, like we were each other's friends, each other's family. Like a lot of us were East Coast transplants, so I don't know. We spent a lot of time together. Our team started to fall apart. Like one by one, people were starting to leave, and so as soon as like one of my closest colleagues decided he was leaving, I was like, all right, I guess this is my time now too. It was only a matter of time. Like the way our director described it, she's like, I knew as soon as one person fell, all the rest of you dominoes were going to fall too, and it was a domino effect. I think there's only one person still there.
And so when you started looking, what were you looking, what opportunities were you trying to find?
So I knew I wanted to stay in demand generation because that had been serving me pretty well at Circle. And I was still passionate about the restaurant and hospitality world. I knew that was something that I wanted to stay in. So I was looking for different tech companies that were doing things with restaurants, with hotels. I even looked at real estate and co-working type businesses. I just kind of like threw my darts wherever I could throw them. And actually, the manager actually came to me, found me on LinkedIn, because somebody with my profile, I think at that point in time, was pretty few and far between. People who had, done operations work in hospitality, like new hotels, new restaurants, but also new tech and new marketing technology and demand gen infrastructure. That was hard to find. So I guess, they stumbled across my profile. We got to speaking, and a couple months later, I had the job and made the move.
When you had that offer, did you consider trying to use it as leverage to get more out of Circle, or did you know you were gone?
Oh, I knew I was gone. I also knew that they would never match the number that I'd gotten from this new company.
When you told your manager that you were leaving, you already mentioned that, she said like, oh, I knew once one domino fell, everyone was going to go. Was there any surprise when you were leaving?
No, she was not surprised at all, just because somebody else had quit before me. So she knew as soon as that person was gone, I would be soon after. And she literally said to me, she's like, I have to say this to you out of protocol, but I don't really think there's anything I can do. Is there anything we can do to save you? And I was like, well,
Hmm.
you're right, because no, there is not. Um, so I had made up my mind. I remember being like so nervous, to the point of like almost being nauseous before I was telling her that I was gonna quit, because I'd never quit a job before. Like this was my first real job, and I had been there over 2 years. And I, as much as I resented the company in a lot of ways, I like owe them so much for the experience that I gained there. And I was just like a ball of nerves and emotions. And so like quitting that job felt very, very profound. Like I still remember it. And I like still remember like which conference room I was in. I don't know. It was just like a very poignant experience. But I knew there was no backing down. I like had made up my mind, and I was not turning back.
And how did your colleagues react to you leaving?
No one was surprised. They were like, I'm surprised this didn't happen months ago.
And so then I think, the one question that we always like to end on is, you've described like a very robust experience at Circle. If you could go back in time to Lauren, getting that job and moving out to San Francisco, is there anything that you would tell her? Would you tell her, like, don't move, don't take that job, or would you have still done it?
It's hard to say, because I just remember the first year being so miserable, but I think it was really character building for me. So I think, if I could go back and give my younger self advice, I would say do it, throw yourself into it, appreciate this experience, work hard, play hard, but don't do anything you're going to regret, which I honestly didn't at that company. I have no regrets about my experience there. I think maybe it would have been nice to know what I was signing up for. Maybe there's a different company I would have gained a little bit more of a solid footing at, but I think that's the nature of being at a startup. Like, it's that excitement. It's that unexpected sort of adventure you take yourself on with your career. And I've always thrived in a bit of chaos. So I think I would have told myself, like, go for it, work hard, and you're going to go places. Because honestly, until COVID-19 happened, like, I had my dream job and I wouldn't have been there without the experience at Circle.
That's great. Well, Lauren, thank you so much for joining us today.
Of course. It was so great chatting with you both.
Wow, another great episode. That story took a lot of twists and turns I wasn't expecting. What stood out for you, Jake?
Well, the first thing that stood out for me, we sort of talked at the beginning about our first role out of college, and not really, one thing about your first real job is you just don't know how the work world works. And so, Lauren talking about having these customers who hated her product and how there was that churn. And, I think now today, any of us, Lauren or either of us would know, like, oh, this is a horrible thing. But she just sort of went with it for quite some time.
I mean, I think that's the thing. When you're new to the corporate workforce, you have no idea. Like, I'm sure Lauren in her previous roles when she was working at the restaurant, she had to deal with unhappy customers a lot of the time. But when you're dealing with unhappy customers at a restaurant, it's very different than dealing with them with a business you're trying to grow annual recurring revenue over if you're losing them every single time.
And do you think that once that happened, she should have immediately left, or because her first job, she should have just stuck with it?
Ooh, I think when you're so new in your career, you have no option, but you kind of have to stick with it. Just as I think Lauren knew this, you have to build that story of you did something at this company. You didn't just join and quit right off the bat. Unless you quit on day one, you're kind of stuck and locked in because then you have to go back to all these other recruiters. You're just kind of get locked in then. There's not much you can do. You got to see what happens, at least for a year or so.
Yep. Were there other things that really stood out for you?
I think that, this thing resonated with me a lot was just as companies become more corporate, you lose a lot of kind of the culture of the company in some good ways and some bad ways. But I definitely know the fact of, you have kind of the suits come in and you lose a lot of the pizzazz that made the company. You have those people who work at the company who don't like structure, like to kind of approach problems in their own kind of crazy way, even though it might not be operationally efficient. And you kind of lose those people, although they're a lot of fun to work with and can come up with great ideas. They're not usually the best for kind of the corporate world when the company's grown to that level.
Yeah, it's like growing up that, when you're in high school, you and your friends do crazy things, and then, you become an adult and you've got responsibilities, and then you take a more buttoned up approach to things. And I think that's what we sort of see with her company, that as it was growing, and they brought in these outsiders, they became a little bit more straight laced.
So even though the company got more buttoned up over time, Jake, it seemed like the parties were still wild and crazy.
But, with tech companies, everyone feels obligated to throw a party, and there's also this escalation of parties. Like, it's not enough to have, at first it was like, oh, you have beer in your office. Then it's like, oh, we had happy hour in a bar, and it's like we have a happy hour on a boat that goes around the bay, and just escalates and escalates. And there is this culture within the tech companies of you have to serve alcohol to your employees, and you have to do it in a way that they'll remember. It's like, weddings getting out of hand. It's the same thing with company parties.
Oh yeah. And during the holiday season, all the tech employees are comparing their holiday party to everyone else's holiday party and saying like, why doesn't management care more enough about us to like let us go on a boat around the bay? Why do we only get a small little room at a restaurant?
Well,
Or why
there is the fear like, oh, last year we were on a boat in the bay, and now we just have a small room in the restaurant. Is the company not doing as well as we were last year?
That's a totally fair point. And it just becomes kind of a sinkhole in money. And company parties are fun though. That is a big thing that people do like parties. So it's
And it's a great way to get to know your colleagues. Like, normally you're just talking to them about work stuff, and you had to have those experiences. You're not even a drinker. I mean, sorry to make it sound like
Yeah.
so bad, but even as someone who doesn't drink, you still find you get a lot of bonding out of those times when
You
you're away from your desk and away from a meeting room.
Yeah, you do. And I think about my career. I think a lot of the moments I remember is hanging out with my coworkers at the bar, going on walks around different cities, uh, all those crazy things that build up such great memories. And unfortunately, sometimes they just get out of hand, and those memories are not good, and they're bad for the company, and they're bad for the people working there. Um, it's a hard topic. I don't know how you fix that.
Right, because I mean, the reason why they're so fun is you have a few drinks, you loosen up. But of course, when alcohol is involved, people do tend to overdrink sometimes. I'm certainly guilty of it as much as anyone else. And when people drink too much, their behavior just can sometimes be completely inappropriate. And as we heard today from Lauren, it can make other employees feel very uncomfortable. So how can you have that balance of getting people loose, but not, inconsiderate of others?
Yeah. And I think the big thing there, Jake, is we're not going to solve it talking just me and you here. But I think the big thing is the number one thing you can do as a person is just focus on how you can be a better person and being an ally to people in the workplace, and making sure you're making a safe and inclusive environment. So we found some links below that I included in the show notes on how to be a better ally to women in the workplace, particularly if you're a straight white male, such as Jake and myself. So definitely check those out if you want to make yourself a better ally in the workplace. And with that, that's the end of the episode. So thanks for listening, and stay tuned. In the near future, we'll have episode 8 out.